The air in the coastal caves hung heavy, a saline shroud clinging to Blake's lungs. Each breath tasted of brine and ancient stone, a metallic tang that sharpened the edges of the perpetual twilight. Water dripped with monotonous regularity from unseen fissures, echoing in the vast, hollow chambers. Blake, headlamp beam cutting a precise swathe through the gloom, moved with the deliberate caution of someone mapping a treacherous landscape. Their boots, heavy and waterproof, crunched on a mix of sand and fallen rock, each step measured, each movement economical. Blake was an archivist by trade, accustomed to the hushed sanctity of climate-controlled vaults, the crisp rustle of parchment, the ordered silence of forgotten histories. This expedition, self-funded and meticulously planned, was a departure from their usual domain, yet the impulse driving it was the same, the preservation of the past, the meticulous cataloging of what time had attempted to erase. The determination that fueled Blake's work in the archives now propelled them deeper into the earth, a relentless pursuit of truth beneath layers of myth. They paused, playing the beam across a section of wall. The rock here was different, smoother, less eroded by the ceaseless caress of the sea. A faint, almost imperceptible seam ran vertically, a line too straight, too deliberate for natural formation. The air, already thick with the scent of decay and damp earth, now seemed to hold another, more subtle odor, something sharp, mineral, like ozone after a distant storm. With a grunt of effort, Blake found a purchase point, a small, almost invisible indentation. They braced a boot against the opposite wall and pushed, muscles straining. The stone groaned, a low, grinding sound that resonated through the cave, vibrating through Blake's chest. Slowly, agonizingly, a section of the wall began to pivot inward. A rush of stale, stagnant air, heavy with the scent of forgotten ages, spilled out. Blake recoiled slightly, the sudden displacement of atmosphere a physical shock. Beyond the newly revealed opening lay not another cavern, but a narrow, unworked passage, rough-hewn and sloping downward. The air within was utterly still, devoid of the constant drip and sigh of the outer caves. Blake hesitated, the beam of their lamp probing the depths. This was it. The culmination of months of research, of dismissed warnings from the local fishing community, of countless hours spent deciphering faded maps in cryptic journals. The passage opened into a small, circular chamber, barely wide enough for Blake to stand upright. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and devoid of any natural features. At the center, resting on a low, irregular pedestal of what appeared to be fused rock, was the object. It was not large, perhaps the size of a human skull, but its presence filled the small chamber. It defied easy description. Not metal, not stone, not wood. Its form was irregular, a series of complex, non-Euclidean angles that seemed to shift subtly if Blake tried to focus too hard. There were no carvings, no discernible markings, no indication of its purpose or origin. It simply was. Blake knelt, their breath catching in their throat. This was no ordinary artifact, no forgotten tool or ceremonial relic. It wasn't fear, not yet, but a profound sense of wrongness, of something fundamentally out of place in the order of the world. It felt ancient in a way that transcended geological time, alien in a way that defied biological classification. As Blake extended a gloved hand towards it, a faint, almost subliminal hum seemed to emanate from the object, a vibration felt more in the bones of their skull than heard with their ears. The air around it seemed to warp, the outlines of the chamber walls blurring at the periphery of Blake's vision. For a fleeting second, the smooth, polished surface of the object seemed to ripple, as if the very fabric of reality around it was momentarily malleable. Blake blinked, shaking their head slightly. The hum subsided, the visual distortion vanished. The chamber walls were solid, the object still and inert. Had they imagined it? Their meticulous nature demanded verification, a logical explanation. But no logic applied here. This object was an affront to everything Blake understood about existence. Blake stared at the object, their determination battling a burgeoning, terrifying realization they had found something that was never meant to be found, and in doing so, had perhaps begun to unravel something within themselves. The artifact pulsed with an imperceptible thrum against Blake's gloved palm, a vibration more felt in the bone than heard by the ear. Its surface, cool and unervingly smooth, seemed to absorb the faint light from the headlamp, reflecting nothing. Blake traced the intricate, non-Euclidean patterns etched into its material, patterns that shifted and reconfigured themselves the longer they stared, not physically moving, but subtly altering in Blake's perception. The metallic tang in the air of the coastal caves intensified, becoming almost a flavor on the tongue, an acrid reminder of the ancient, enclosed space. A tremor ran through Blake's hand, not from fear, but from a profound sense of dislocation. The artifact was heavy, denser than its size suggested, yet it felt hollow. A paradox Blake couldn't reconcile. They considered leaving it, abandoning the find, but the urge to understand, to catalog this anomaly, was a cold, insistent pressure in their chest. The archivist's instinct, honed over years of sifting through forgotten histories, demanded answers. Blake carefully secured the object in a padded container, the soft material muffling the strange thrum, but not entirely silencing it within their mind. Navigating the treacherous path out of the coastal caves, Blake found the familiar rock formations now seemed subtly wrong. Blake paused, straining to listen, but only the relentless drip and the distant murmur of the ocean met their ears. Back in the quiet solitude of their study, a space usually a sanctuary of order and knowledge, the artifact sat on a heavy oak table, radiating an invisible influence. Blake meticulously documented its dimensions, weight, and surface properties. The material resisted all standard tests. It was neither organic nor inorganic in any known sense. Its molecular structure, under the electron microscope, appeared to twist, forming impossible geometries that defied conventional physics. Blake felt a prickle of unease. This was beyond anything in the archives. They turned to the vast digital repository, searching for anything remotely similar. Ancient texts, forgotten folklore, obscure archaeological findings. Then, a flicker. Not a direct match, but close enough to be unnerving. The engravings depicted figures prostrated before abstract, formless entities, and always, that symbol. Blake cross-referenced the civilization's decline. Sudden, catastrophic, and without clear cause. One fragment of text, translated from a forgotten dialect, spoke of the great unraveling, of reality itself becoming porous. Blake dismissed it as poetic metaphor, but the words echoed with a new, unsettling resonance. The connections began to proliferate. A strange alignment of stars noted in a medieval astrological text, a pattern of geological instability in a remote region, a series of mass hallucinations recorded by a colonial surveyor. Each piece, innocuous on its own, now seemed to converge, forming a tapestry of impossible coincidence. Blake felt their grip on rational thought beginning to loosen. Was this all a figment of their increasingly strained mind, imposing patterns where none existed? The hum intensified, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to synchronize with their heartbeat. The voices in the coastal caves. A sudden, sharp pain lanced behind Blake's eyes, and the room seemed to tilt. The familiar bookshelves wavered, their spines blurring into an indistinct smear of color. For a horrifying moment, the lines between the physical objects in the room seemed to dissolve, the air shimmering with unseen energies. Blake gasped, clutching the edge of the table, the wood feeling strangely soft, yielding beneath their fingers. The hum became a roar, an internal cacophony that threatened to shatter their concentration. They blinked rapidly, the room snapping back into focus, but the image of the dissolving reality lingered, a terrifying afterimage burned into their perception. The artifact on the table seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, reflecting nothing, but radiating everything. Blake was no longer sure what was real, or if they had ever truly known. Blake traced the intricate, non-Euclidean patterns etched across its obsidian-like material, their determination a brittle shield against the growing unease. The coastal caves, usually a place of damp echoes and the rhythmic sigh of the ocean, felt suddenly vast and hollow, as if the very air had thinned. Blake's fingers, guided by an impulse beyond conscious thought, pressed into a specific juncture of the impossibly twisting lines. A sudden, sharp jolt went through their hand, not electrical, but a pure, raw information transfer that bypassed the senses entirely. It was a cold, alien understanding that flared in the mind, momentarily eclipsing all other thoughts. Blake gasped, a sound swallowed by the cavern's maw. The patterns on the artifact seemed to deepen, to shift with an internal luminescence, no longer merely etched but living. It was the grinding of impossible gears, the stretching of fabric that was not fabric, the slow, agonizing collapse of a structure built on principles utterly alien to human comprehension. Blake squeezed their eyes shut, but the internal sound only intensified, now accompanied by visions. Not images, but impressions, a vastness without dimension, a color that burned without light, a weight that crushed without mass. Blake's grip tightened on the artifact, a desperate anchor in a mind suddenly adrift. The air grew heavy, not with moisture or temperature, but with an immense, silent pressure. The familiar rock walls of the cave began to ripple, not visually, but structurally. Blake saw, with an internal eye, the atoms of the stone momentarily losing their cohesion, stretching into impossible filaments, then snapping back into place, subtly altered. Yet, a deeper, more primal curiosity held them captive. This was what they had sought, wasn't it? The truth. The artifact was a key, and now the lock was turning. They forced their eyes open. The artifact vibrated violently in their hand, a tremor that resonated through their entire skeletal structure. Blake felt a profound, sickening displacement, as if their own body was a poorly rendered illusion. The revelation came then, not as words or images, but as an invasive, complete understanding. It was not an entity that lurked, but a fundamental error in reality itself. A cosmic oversight, a seam ripped in the fabric of existence, and the artifact was merely a fragment of the raw, unadulterated truth that pulsed through the tear. Humanity, all life, was a fleeting, improbable anomaly, sustained by the sheer, unthinking force of ignorance. The coastal caves, Blake's own body, the very concept of time and space, all were temporary, arbitrary constructs, perpetually on the verge of collapsing into the utter, formless chaos that lay just beyond the veil. Blake screamed, a sound ripped from a throat suddenly raw and alien. It was not a scream of fear, but of absolute, annihilating comprehension. The world spun, not around them, but within them. Their sense of self dissolved, their memories scattering like dust motes in an impossible wind. The patterns on the artifact now burned with an unbearable intensity, no longer external. They were etched directly onto Blake's retina, into their neural pathways, into the very core of their being. The non-Euclidean geometries became the new architecture of their thoughts, twisting and folding their perception into grotesque, impossible forms. The coastal caves were gone. The ocean's roar was a distant, meaningless hum. There was only the artifact, pulsing, vibrating, expanding, consuming. Blake's hands, their body, their mind, all became part of the impossible patterns, a single, agonizing node in the infinite, terrible geometry of a truth that should never have been known. They were no longer an archivist, no longer Blake. They were merely an aperture, a raw, screaming portal through which the cosmic horror bled into a reality too fragile to contain it.